Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Mary LaCourciere. I am the Director of Education at the Nantucket Historical Association. We are thrilled today to have Darius Coombs with us, who is a member of the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe. He's here to talk to us about the important cultural and traditions of the Wampanoag people and its connection to Nantucket. We are also excited to celebrate the arrival of the Mashpee, which is a dugout canoe Darius has created for the Nantucket Historical Association that will remain on the island. And you can see it outside in front of the museum on your way out, so just make sure you check that out. Darius, he's taught history and the traditions of the Wampanoag and other indigenous cultures for over 35 years. He has served as the director of the Wampanoag and Eastern Woodlands Interpretation and Training at Plymouth Patuxet. He has consulted with the exhibits at the Smithsonian Museum of the American Indian, as well as working with PBS, the History Channel, and Smithsonian Productions. Darius is currently the cultural coordinator at Mashpee Wampanoag Educational Department in Mashpee, Massachusetts. Yesterday, we had the pleasure of having Darius at the Nantucket Public School, where he engaged with all the grades from grades 3 through 9. And those children are very enthusiastic and well-versed in Wampanoag history. So welcome, Darius.
Waniki sak ni tapan. Nakis? Waniki sak? Welcome, friends. Good day. That's in my language, Wampanoag. And my name is Darius Coombs, and thank you very much for NHA, Mary, for having me today. Love coming over here. I got a lot of family here, a lot of family at Prospect Cemetery that I'd love to visit. So this is not really work for me. This is a pleasure trip. And I'm glad to see all these smiling faces. I recognize some little ones from yesterday here. So what I'm going to do today, guys, is I'm going to bring you through the centuries, right? In about a 40-45 minute span. So hopefully you guys got seatbelts on, because we're going to go kind of quick. And we'll also talk about the Mashpee project that you saw coming in and how we made that, and watch a video afterwards. But after my end of my slide presentation, which will go about 45 minutes, I want to answer some questions you guys might have. So I probably won't take questions on beforehand. So just think of some questions as we go. So for us, this is my presentation. It's called 13 Moons, which includes Nantucket. You cannot talk about Wampanoag people without Nantucket. That's obvious. It's a Wampanoag community, right? And for us as a people, you know, we go through a 13-moon cycle like you see, which is a full year cycle. And that right there is Mother Earth for us. That's what we call Turtle Island. And think about the turtle itself, it has 13 shells, right? And that's how we get the 13 moons, which is vice versa each way. And for us as a people here, right, we've been here for over 12,000 years. 12,241 to be exact, you know. And we're Wampanoag Nation, right? There's over 1,000 different indigenous nations going across North America today that we know of. What makes us similar amongst the Cherokee, Ojibwe, Navajo, and there's a lot of differences, but what makes us similar is how we think about life, right? We don't put ourselves above, below any form of life, being human life, being animal life, being plant life, fish life. We're all considered to be equal. So when we see life taken, that we do ceremony behind that, if we have to take it ourselves, you know. The differences is the diets and the languages. Our language is the Wampanoag language, which has been spoken for years, which is going to touch on how we almost lost it and how we regained it. But life in general, that's just all around how we think about Mother Earth, how we think about the cycle itself. Like where I'm standing right now is part of who I am. You know, that's very important, you know. Like the land we are on is part of my soul. Like you can't own this. We had no idea of that concept at all for thousands of years. So I'm gonna start out like that, right? And for Wampanoag people, you can see the states there that were developed over the years. The Wampanoag Nation spreads right near Boston, going all throughout Cape Cod, and obviously Nantucket, Nope, which is Martha's Vineyard, Penny Keys, Cuttyunk, all the Elizabeth Islands. And there's probably about 69, 70 Wampanoag communities at one time. And how you describe yourself, right? If you were a stranger back then and you came to here, you might say you're from Nantucket or Nantucket. You wouldn't say Wampanoag, because Wampanoag being a nation of people, they'll expect if you're traveling, you should know that already. Like where I'm from, I'm Mashpee. So you come to my area, I'm gonna tell you I'm Mashpee. What are you? So where I used to work at Plymouth, back what that is called is Patuxet, which means place of water, running water. So I will say I'm a Patuxet. Some other Wampanoag communities being Chappaquiddick, Mattapoisett, Seekonk, Pocasset. I mention these names because they're obvious town names today, and they've always been Wampanoag communities though. That's very important. And each community would govern itself. So what we do, I'm gonna bring you to a year, right, before we had major interruption. I'm gonna keep flashing back and forth. And you'll know what I'm talking about when I say major interruption in our culture. For us as a people, right, this is sacred for us, our herring, our fish, right, that run upstream during the springtime. And when we see this fish running upstream, we know when to come out near the ocean, close near the ocean. We know to come out to the rivers and build our houses, summer houses, our spring and summer houses. This right here is a cattail mat covered house, right? And the cattail itself is a water plant. So a lot of the time we had a spring and summer place and a fall and winter place. Spring and summer come out near the ocean, fall and winter go inland enough so you get protection from the wind from the ocean itself. And the mats themselves, the cattail, this house right here would hold probably about 6 to 8 people. You're talking about maybe 3 or 4 generations on the inside. Back then, if you're in a canoe, right, and you're going along the shore in a Mashpee, what you would have seen on the shore would have been a cattail mat covered house. And all around the house, you would have seen cornfields. It's kind of like, I compare how the Midwest is. You guys know how the Midwest is. You see a townhouse, right? A house, a farmhouse, I should say. You drive in the fields, you drive up a little more, see another farmhouse and more fields. That's how we see on the shore if you're on the boat and out in the Mashpee. So this is a summer house. We would have grandparents, parents, kids, uncles and aunts living there. But we set this up in the springtime and our New Year, right? Our New Year is not January 1st. Our New Year is when everything comes to life. You think about that. When do the fish start running upstream? When do like the herring you saw, when do the birds start chirping? When do the flowers start coming out? And obviously this is a modern picture of New Year's, but this is when we dance, we sing, we socialize, we enjoy each other's company, and we thank Mother Earth, we thank the Creator for having another New Year, because it's not always guaranteed. Okay, and we've done this type of ceremony for thousands of years and still continue to do ceremonies today. Each year might be a little bit different on the New Year, depending on the cycle. You have to wait until the herring starts to run. You have to wait until the shad bush starts to bloom. So different signs in nature. It's not exactly, okay, January 1st, depending on Mother Earth itself. Now, once we celebrate New Year's, everybody, see, we're people, we love celebrations, right? We love to dance, we love to socialize, we love to sing, we love to dance and meet people. But we have to get to work afterwards, right? And the people who take care of these fields, vegetables would represent probably about 60, 70% of our diet. And the woman would take care of the fields. Women are considered to be the life givers. They give life to babies. So they also give life to Mother Earth, right? So they do the planting of the corn, the beans, the squash, the watermelon. If you look closely at the mounds here, actually the corn, so I can see a mound. So you plant the corn in the mound. When the corn gets about hand high, you plant the beans next to it. And when the beans grow, the beans will wrap right around the stalk of the corn. What the corn does, corn takes nitrogen out of the ground. And what beans do, beans add it right back into the ground. Plant the squash on the bottom. Squash has a large leaf, and that will shade the ground to keep the ground soft. Vegetables for the Wampanoag people will probably represent easily over half, if not 2/3 of the diet. But we had our responsibility, so it was a woman's responsibility to take care of the fields. Now, when do you stop planting corn? You have to wait till the shad bush starts to bloom, and when the shad bush starts to bloom, and when the oak leaf becomes big as a squirrel's ear, this is true, it works, right? Big as a squirrel's ear, you wait until the next new moon. The reason you wait until the next new moon is because the new moon draws gravity up, so it will help the corn seed to grow. Yeah. This is a winter-style house we had. I didn't make these myself. This is a bark-covered house, and the types of bark you would use would have been a lot of elm and chestnut. We didn't have Home Depot back then, right? So you can't run out and buy tree bark. So the trees you would have used would have been elm and chestnut, and you have to wait. We're seasonal people, right? You have to wait until the sap runs up and down the tree, and that happens during the spring, early summer. And what happens is you got the wood, you got bark, sap goes up, divides the two, cut around the bottom, cut around the top, slice down the middle, and peel the bark off the tree, okay? Then you put it up like shingles. You start at the bottom, and you overlap it all the way up to the top. So the frame itself is made out of cedar, the interior frame. They are waterproof, but you can see how the grain of the bark is. It's to go into the tree, so the water runs right down. And for our winter houses, we live in large communities during the winter, and our communities during the winter might hold anywhere from 200 people at one time to a couple thousand people out of those 69, 70 communities, right? And our houses would get anywhere from 100 foot long to 200 foot in length. Although we found the footprint of the largest house we think. We found the largest that I know of. It was found out in Worcester, right? This footprint of this house was 320 foot in length and 60 foot in width. But I'm thinking, I do these houses, I study these houses, was this more than a house? Because you look at where Worcester is, that's where the border of the Nipmunks are. So that might have been a gathering of nations type of house, a meeting house. And this is, everybody loves the strawberries, right? And this is one of the first berries that come out in the month of June, and we celebrate the strawberry. We have our strawberry festivals in June. We dance, we sing, we give thanks to Mother Earth. We give thanks to the Creator for having the strawberry come out. The first berry that comes out is in June, and we know the last berry that comes out we celebrate is in October, being the cranberry itself. In the middle, you got blueberries, raspberries, what else? Blackberries, huckleberries. This right here also comes out in the springtime. This is a fiddlehead fern. We have a lot of spring greens that we eat still today, a lot of medicinal plants, and the fiddlehead is one of them. We have some wild onions, wild garlic. This is still part of the diet today for Wampanoag people. This has not been interrupted. You're gonna see me using that term a lot today, because unfortunately there was a lot of interruption during times. And this goes all around the Wampanoag country, this type of diet. Although over here on Nantucket, you probably have seen a lot of Wampanoag people more rely on seafood. Let's talk about seafood right now. This is actually my wife and myself here. Yeah, we did a lot of fishing, as we know. My dad was born here. Well, no, yeah, my dad was born here. My grandfather moved here from Mashpee and married my grandmother, being Ruth West Coombs, who's from Quinner in Chappaquiddick. So, but my dad, I mentioned this because my dad and my grandfather were fishermen on Nantucket here. They did a lot of cohogging. Yeah, my voice cracked up a little bit because my grandfather passed away at 46 from pneumonia when he went on cohogging, so unfortunate. But fishing, doing clamming, shell fishing, ocean-going fishing was very important amongst Wampanoag people back then and still today as a people. We still do that. I still clam, I still shellfish. People still hunt. And the types of fish we would go for was striped bass, pickerel. We had so much flounder. We walk on the beach at low tide and spear flounder. We would go for codfish. The European recordings that the codfish were so thick on the ocean they could walk right across their backs. They say from Plymouth to Provincetown, we're across the backs with no problem. We have so much lobster around here that you can walk down the beach at low tide and pick lobster off the beach. That's true. That's a true story. I mention it a lot, and I get the same type of reaction, a laugh in the crowd, because we take on lobster as a delicacy today. A lobster, for us as Wampanoag people, has never been a big deal. It was considered to be like chicken. I'm not saying we didn't eat it, but it was like chicken. It was common. There was even an incident back in 1623, I think Governor Bradford was so embarrassed, he had a ship that's come in, some visitors coming in. So I'm so sorry, I have to feed you guys lobster today. It wasn't considered to be a big deal till later on in history. Even go back 100 years ago, lobster was fed to prisoners in jail. And the prisoners had a big uprising. They were so sick of eating it, they said, come on, enough's enough. Every single day. So there was a law that was put on books in Massachusetts that you only could feed lobster to prisoners twice a week. If you did it any more than that, it was considered to be inhumane. But the largest fish we would go for was found in fresh and salt water. It's called sturgeon. And those are about 20, 30 foot in length. They've been fished out because people like their eggs, which is caviar. But the way you go for sturgeon is you go inside your machine, right? You go out at nighttime. You have pine pitch torches on the end of your boats. And because of the light of the torches, the sturgeon are considered to be bottom feeders. They'll see the light of the torch. They'll come up, flip over on their belly, and you would harpoon them. And the tip of the harpoon, probably made out of antler, will go inside and you drag the fish ashore. Most of the time, the fish got bigger than the boat, so you couldn't put the fish inside the boat. So you would have to drag the fish ashore. So yeah, fishing was very, very big and still is today amongst our people. We had, during the spring and summer months, some ice fishing during the winter. Everything we have today, we had back then for fishing. We had harpoon, we had spears, we had hook and line, we had nets, we had weirs. Nothing new today amongst the technology what we didn't have. So one thing I want to mention, it wasn't a struggle back then. It wasn't survival. I hear that term used a lot. Oh, how'd you guys survive back then? Huh. Well, you just shouldn't roll over bed one morning, oh my goodness, what am I going to do today? Where am I going to get food? There's been a system set up for thousands of years that's been passed on from generation to generation, okay? So people knew what to do, and everything was plentiful back then. You had plenty of fish out in the water, plenty of deer in the woods. This is my wife. She does a lot of shell fishing herself. She likes to do so. I want to mention some leaders we had. I'm going to flash back and forth. These are some leaders around Wampanoag country. You get Earl Mills Sr. way over here to the left. I mentioned him because he's still living today. This picture's from the early 1900s. And he's over 100 years old now. And we call him Flying Eagle. He looks just like his grandson. His grandson looks like him, I should say. Then you have Russell Gardner, Lorenzo Jeffers, Leroy Perry, Charles Harding, Louis Webkish. So we've always had traditional leaders, and how we pass down leadership was passed from father to son, okay? It was normally hereditary. Although the son wasn't capable of not running the government, you pass it down to your daughter. So we had women leaders back then. Our women are highly respected. You have to respect anybody who gives life, and women give life. Still today, right, our women control everything that goes inside of our house, going back thousands of years, still today. Back then, right, if a woman wanted to get a divorce from her husband, the only thing she had to do was take the man's belongings and put it in front of the door. And that would be a sign for him to leave. Now, I want to keep this in mind for you guys. When you do a marriage ceremony, that's a heavy ceremony for our people. I know the divorce rate's around 50% today, but I've been married over 20 years, and yeah, it was a heavy native ceremony we had, my wife and I. So once you're ready to get married to somebody, hopefully that'll be a true thing. It'll last forever. We all want it to be. A couple other leaders that made the papers over the years. Hunting, like I said, this is my buddy Tim, he's Cherokee. Hunting was still a big deal today, like it was back then. He was mentioned to the kids yesterday, and they got a kick out of it, I always mention, what do you think we hunted for? Well, give me the 4 big animals we hunted for. They always get the first 2. That's not a problem. they always mention, okay, deer and black bear. I said, give me the other two, the big ones. They might mention moose, right? I go, give me the last one. I know it's very difficult for like third, fourth, fifth graders. I go, I'm gonna give you a hint, guys. It begins with the letter E. Elephant! The wrong continent, not an elephant. So elk. Those are the 4 big game we hunt for, right? They've always around the area at one time. They've been hunted out. There's still a lot of deer we know over here on Nantucket that people hunt for. I have actually tribal members who come over here on Nantucket and hunt for the deer during deer season. And there's numerous ways of hunting back then. You can use a bow and arrow. You can use deadfall traps. You can use, what do you call those? Snares, a deer snare, right? Which you step on a snare and the rope will go around your leg and be launched up in the air around the deer's leg. I mentioned leg a lot because back when the Pilgrims arrived here, they arrived on Cape Cod first, right? And their first future governor to be, William Bradford, he was walking into the woods with his men and he stepped on a deer snare and he got launched up in the air. And he complained about, he was all right, you know, but he complained about his hip the rest of his life, how it was sore. So the meats were different back then. Animals were allowed to run wherever they wanted to run. So the meats were a lot leaner. Small animals back then, raccoons, squirrels, beavers. You had turkeys for fowl. You had goose, duck, partridge. Oh, you guys like the taste of skunk? Anybody had skunk before? Skunk's a Wampanoag delicacy, right? It is. I hear you guys don't have skunk on Nantucket. I'm not sure if you did or not at one time. But the way you hunt for skunk is you get 2 boys. One boy will be in front of the skunk distracting them. You get the other boy that'll sneak upon him from behind, grab its hind legs and lift him up in the air. In order for a skunk to spray, he has to be on all 4s to spray. So you get him up there, you can't do that. Right? You bang him over the head real quick. You cut him open and take his stink glands out. And there's nothing wrong with the meat. It tastes like a sweet chicken. You know what you're having for lunch today, right? We'll be serving in a few minutes. Lobster and skunk. But yeah, hunting was mainly for us done during the fall and winter, still is today, because we know the females don't carry their young at that time, and we know the furs are the thickest too. So you had a lot of vegetables, you had the deer, you had the fish throughout the years. This is inside of one of our houses. Actually, these are 3 of my daughters. I have 4 daughters myself. You know, the one drinking, they're both drinking tea, but the one to the far to the right is Tashima. And you guys might have heard that name. You guys are from Nantucket, or you live here, or stay here, or vacation in here. Tashima is, at one time, she was considered to be she was a daughter of a chief on the island here. And what we call it Tashima, it is a Wampanoag name. And you got Tashima Farms today around here. You got Tashima Lane, a very recognizable name on Nantucket. And what Tashima means in my language is one who lifts up. It's not because she's big and strong, as you can see, but Tashima wakes up in a good mood almost every single day. And when she wakes up in a good mood, everybody feels good. So that's why we name our kids, right? You can go through 4, 5, 6 different names in a lifespan. As you would change yourself, your name to change also to fit how you are. So if you're stuck with one name, you don't change a whole lot, right? So hopefully you will be given more than one name throughout your life. And she was like, Dad, why do you call me Tashima? No, but that's a different type of name. I've never heard that before. Then I brought her to here, over Nantucket. I showed all the different locations where her name exists and showed the documents of the daughter of a chief. So she's very proud of her name right now. So that's Stormy in the middle. We call her that because she is a storm. That's our daughter, oldest daughter, Talia. But you can see inside the house, they're cooking. We have furs inside. You can see the cedar poles, the arches. It's a round house, right? And you want to have round houses no matter what. Today, a lot of people build square houses. But round houses just make sense because the wind will go right around them. You know, there's no corners on the house at all. So the aerodynamic, they're good for the weather. And also, these houses, right, rule of thumb when you're making these houses, the big houses during the winter, every 10 foot or so, you want to have a fire pit, and that's for warmth, that's for cooking, and for light. These houses will get to be about 70 degrees easily during the winter. You get these fires going, heat will rise, go up, go down underneath the mats. We have mats on the walls. The cold air will go into the fire and the warm air will circulate around on the inside. When the English got here, they would go inside of our houses and they would see little kids running outside naked. They wrote down themselves that Wampanoag houses got to be warmer than our houses, their houses. But although they might saw something different, doesn't mean they're going to switch over. That's like anybody, I guess. If you live in the same way for thousands of years, you got to bring your way to where you're going, because that's what you're used to. So. This is a couple of clay pots. Cooking's very big amongst our people. I tell people of all ages that we cook a lot of soups, a lot of stews. You're never going to see a big animal being roasted over the fire because you're wasting the skin for clothing, the bones for tools. If you got to take a life of an animal, of anything, you want to use as much as possible, and that's one way you have respect for that animal, giving up its life for you. So you cut it up, make it into a soup or a stew. Use the skin for clothing, use the bones for tools. So everything is used. So you got to have water to drink, right? Spring water. So you always have a spring right by the river to bathe, right by the river to get your natural fresh water to drink. This is my two daughters too, once again, picking berries. This comes from a picture from Scholastic, right? I told the kids yesterday, if you haven't seen the video, check out the Wampanoag Way. They came to me a few years back and said, we want to make a documentary about Wampanoag children back in the 17th century. I said, okay, we've done that before. If you want to do that, we can do that, which is this is the 17th century, but you have to show what the kids do today. And that's how kids are going to relate to in the classroom, okay? So it shows Tashman and Storm in the 17th century, then it goes to them in jeans and t-shirts and sneakers riding bikes. And it's in every third grade class going across the United States. It's part of the curriculum. And I'm in it too. And I do a lot of presentations, right? And a lot of time I go into these schools and they're showing the documentary. And I'll never forget, one of the kids, right, looked at me and looked at the screen, I was on the screen, and couldn't believe what he was seeing. He's like, you're Tashman's dad. I'm like, yep. So check out the Wampanoag Way. Now I'm going to leave it with this, guys, right? This is before major interruption happened. I'm going to bring on a little emotional roller coaster here because a lot of things happen to our people within the next 20 minutes. But this was considered to be normal life for us. And the first time, let's call this year 1613, then we lead up to 1614, right? For us in 1614, there was a trader guy named John Smith who came around the area and mapped out New England. But he also left, when he left his fishing captain behind, Thomas Hunt. And what Thomas Hunt did around what was known as Plymouth Patuxent area is he took 19 Patuxent as slaves. So you had some trading going on, you had fishing going on, but you also had enslaving going on too. And this is back in 1614, right? This is 6 years before the Pilgrims arrived. And one of these guys he took was Squanto. And Squanto ends up over England, and he was sold to a merchant named John Slaney. And why was this going on? Why were Native people being taken and brought over to Europe? Before the colonists got here in 1620. The idea was, let's bring these people over, let's teach them how to speak the language, and then let's bring them back as guides and interpreters. Unfortunately, on the most part, once we got on over Europe, we had no immunity to what other people had, so we died off. Squanto was fortunate, he made it back 5 years later, which, well, I talked about that in a few minutes. He was one of the fortunate ones, though. Now, this right here is the most devastating thing that ever happened to our people, period, in our history. We had plague, we had disease. There was a major epidemic that came through here between 1616 and 1618, 19, that wiped out anywhere from 70 to 90% of our people within 2 or 3 years. You're talking at one time over 100,000 Wampanoag people at one time in our nation. Those numbers wiped out, maybe 9 out of 10 were wiped out in those years. What we know about this plague, this disease, skin turned yellow, people got open sores on their bodies, people died within 2 or 3 days. Common thought over the years, hepatitis. Some interpretation, smallpox. We don't think it was smallpox because we had an outbreak in 1623, we had an outbreak in 1633, and we know about the devastation of 1763 with the vaccine that was given to Native people on Nantucket here. And from that vaccine of smallpox, 2/3 of the population on Nantucket was wiped out, Native population. So, but what we do know, like I said, it was the most devastating thing that happened to our people. What disease control came out with 10 years ago, because we had European traders like the French, English, and Dutch, and up north, up in Canada, you had a lot of the French traders up there, and they would have rats on their ships. And what disease control believes is the rats got off the ships, and the fetus of the rats got into the water system, creating liver disease, okay? That spread down the coastline. It went from northern Maine all the way to Narragansett Bay. And now listen, you got the island, you got Nantucket, you got Martha's Inn, you got Cappawhack, you got Penakeesh, you got Cuttyhunk. These islands weren't affected a whole lot from that plague, because where are you guys at? You guys are out in the water, right? And it's hard for disease to get out there. So you saw a lot of Native people fleeing to these islands out here, okay? And also, it stopped right before the Narragansett people started in Rhode Island. You think about that too. Why would that plague start? Why not go all the way down the coast? You got the body of water, and the Narragansett and the Wampanoag weren't considered to be great friends back then. So if you're not friends with the people, you don't have that physical contact with the people, you know? So you don't have that interaction. But this right here was the most devastating thing ever for our people, period. You can just imagine the medicine people we lost, the leaders we lost. I can't. I've been doing this for 35 years. It's a puzzle for us, and we just try to fit it together the best we can from the research. Now this is when we know the Pilgrims arrived, 1620, right? They first arrived on Cape Cod. They arrived in Provincetown. They thought about staying down there. They were scouting out the area. There's a few things that happened down there, right? One, they found native storage full of corn, dried corn, right? And which they took with them. Two, they found burials. When they found these burials, some took from the burials, native burials, and some did not. But what also happened, what we call a first encounter, was there was a fight that broke out down there between the two people. Between the Nos and Wampanoag community, and his name was Aspinet, the leader, and they went against the English. There was musket balls shut off, there was arrows that shut off, but nobody died, fortunately. But why did this happen, right? One, taking of the corn, disturbing of graves, and maybe, in my opinion, what Thomas Son did six years prior, when he came here in 1614 and took those slaves. Aspinet, probably one of the Wampanoag leaders, was probably thinking, oh shoot, I see another ship coming in, there's no way he's gonna take more of my people. And fight broke out. That's when they landed down in Plymouth, what is called, people call Patuxet. And the reason they're allowed to stay there is we don't believe in ownership of land. We believe that nobody lives there, go ahead and settle there. We're very caring people too. We know they brought their women and children, which men are friendly type of people, right? We thought. And, but unfortunately, during the months of January, February, that was the deadliest months for the English when they first got here. A lot of them died, half died, between coming over and that first winter. So what happens in March of 1621, this guy, Samuset, walks into the Pilgrim village, and he greets the English by saying hello in their own language, which they're shocked at seeing. And he tells them about the plague. He says he's Abenaki, he's from northern Maine. He was brought down here. He goes, you know what, I'm not from here. I'm gonna bring you a leader who is. He actually stays overnight, which is unusual when you're first meeting the people. He stays in Stephen Hopkins' house. And I was always curious, why would he stay overnight? Now I was figuring out, well, he stayed at Stephen Hopkins' house, and the reason Stephen Hopkins probably allowed him, they wanted Stephen Hopkins, is because Stephen Hopkins was the only Englishman who dealt with Native people before. He was down in Jamestown. So he was one of the people that came under my Mayflower, that only one dealt with Native people. But he ran back, he told the leader, Massasoit, it was all right to come along, And Massasoit came along in 1621 in the spring and made that very powerful treaty between the two people. And what the treaty stated was, if you go to battle, I'm going to help you out, and if I go to battle, you help me out. Aside from that, we keep separate lives. Thanksgiving, it happened one year. It didn't happen, third Thursday in November. It's way past harvest time. It happened in late September, early October. It was a dinner of diplomacy, right? Because of the treaty they had made between the two people. We don't even know if Massasoit was invited to this feast. We know Massasoit's community with Poconoke is 40 miles away. We know he shows up with 90 of his men. They never get an exact date when it happened, but we think it was late September, early October. And he stays for 3 days. He sends his men on hunting, they come back 5 deer. They never ever mention turkey being at that feast. They don't. They mentioned that there was fowl there. It could have been duck, it could have been partridge, it could have been quail. It could have been turkey, but they never mentioned it, but it goes on for 3 days, so. It happened 1 year and 1 year only. And it wasn't called Thanksgiving, it was a harvest festival. This guy was sent out to live amongst the English, Wampanoag. He lived with the English for about 15, 20 years. He was the closest native the Europeans would consider to be a friend, or the English would consider a friend. He knew how to speak English. Where, we don't know. But he might have been over England, brought back. Massasoit would not have sent this guy out here, Wampanoag, if he could not speak English. It just makes sense. He was considered to be a pinnace. If you know what a pinnace is one who counsels on war and one who leads in the battle. And by European standards, they were considered to be indestructible. He was considered to be a councilman, a spiritual leader, and a trusted man of Massasoit. So. Massasoit makes a couple of visits out to Plymouth, right? He comes out in 1623. He's invited by Governor Bradford. This time we know he was invited by Governor Bradford. When he comes to Governor Bradford's wedding in 1623, you believe this? He brings 60 men. If you guys know what a score is 20. So he brings 120 men to his wedding. He brings six other leaders with their wives. So we know that he was invited. He also comes out in 1639 and says, okay, we reformed the treaty. We're going to keep peace between the two, between you and us still. Now, but that's a 16-year gap right there. From 1623 to 1639, there's really nothing written about the Native and English interaction. What happens afterwards, which I'm going to talk about, is you see a lot of, when the English first got here, right, they didn't understand our ways of doing things, our ceremonies. And because they didn't understand our ways of doing things, you would have seen praying towns being established, right? Being placed on Christianity. And you're going to see a lot of Native people say, okay, Christianity was good for us back then. And some people say it wasn't good for us because we had our own ways of doing things. Unless you walk a mile on their moccasins back then, you don't know what the people were going through. So I can't give judgment, right? What I do know is we lost a lot of people from plague. Our culture was changed. Actually, in the 1640s, there was a leader, well, I don't know if he's a leader, but he was a relative of mine named Darius Coombs over Edgartown, right? He knew the King James Bible so well that he was preaching to English people, their religion. But there was a guy, right? There was a guy who, a leader from Chappaquiddick, a sergeant, a chief, called him out there, said, come here, Darius Coombs, what are you doing? We have our own ways of doing things. How can you take on this other people's religion and literally punch them in the face? So it was a very confusing time, but we know Darius Coombs' son went to Harvard University. One of the first praying towns established, Nantucket was one also at one time, was Natick back in 1651, right? And when that was established, it was produced by John Eliot. And now the missionaries we know about is the Mayhews, which came here. We know the Mayhews came here. We know the Cottonwoods. We know the Richard Bournes. But his son, Darius Coombs' son, went to Harvard, being Joel Darius Coombs. And the first graduating class of Harvard University would have been in 1664, I want to say. I have the degree right in my office, 1664. And what happened, there was two Native graduates. One was Caleb, in this book about now Caleb's Crossing, and the other was, that was the only one actually. Joel was supposed to graduate. 2 weeks before graduation, He went home to Martha's Vineyard to visit. He was considered valedictorian. On the way home, back I should say, he stopped here. They stopped here and he was killed. It was unfortunate, he probably was killed by his own people, because there was still a lot of traditionalists still here on the island, a lot. Because the first English settlement was, 1659? So it wasn't that long. So you had a lot of traditionalists still here, and he was killed. But what Harvard did back in 2011, they invited us to graduation and gave my family an honorary degree in his name, which I do have in my office, which I'm pretty proud of. Before I talk about the King Philip's War, right? Massasoit, his son, is known as King Philip, his second son. He is known as also Metacomet. Metacomet was a strong person, and it wasn't pretty times during the decade. You had laws favoring one side, you had Christianity being placed, you had the thought of land was different. You got one side believing in ownership of land, and the other side did not believe in ownership of land. I'll give you one story about Nantucket with King Philip, about Metacomet, right? He heard one of the praying Indians over here in Nantucket was talking, as they say, trash, not good words about his father, Massasoit, who just passed. This made him so upset, he got his men together, and they left around the New Bedford area. They took their Michoud ashes, which we had our boats that were big enough to carry 40 men out here, and found this man who was talking not good words about his father. And that guy didn't have a good day. But this right here is the bloodiest war per capita in New England, you know, the King Philip's War. It was the English going against the native people. I won't get into the battles a whole lot, but it started out June of 1675. It ended up around this area, around Massachusetts, in August 12th of 1676. A lot of people lost their life, English and native people. But there's a guy named Benjamin Church, a captain who found Metacomet out at his home in Poconoke and Mount Hope. And when they found him, which he was led by a native guide, it was a confusing time. You had native people leading English captains going against other native people. And when they found Metacomet, right, they dismantled his body limb by limb, took off his head and brought it back to Plymouth. Now they were deciding, he has a wife, he has a son, we can't kill them, that's not right. What can we do to him? Oh, let's sell him off as slaves. And that's what they did. There's no good words in slavery, good stories I can tell. The closest I can think of is the silver lining in a way, is the ones who were taken as slaves and sold all around, including Bermuda. The ones in Bermuda still have their cultural identity still today. They know who they are as a people, and they come visit their people, being us, during our powwow July 4th weekend on Cape Cod in Mashpee. One year, we go down there and visit them. Imagine that, over 400 years or so being a slave, and still have your cultural identity, knowing who you are. It's pretty amazing. It wasn't pretty times for the losers of the war. This is one law that was placed in 1742, Massachusetts Indian law, which said, if you're a remnant in Massachusetts, right, you have to move to one of 4 locations. You have to move to Mashpee, you have to move to Aquina, you have to move to Heron Pond, which is by the canal, or you have to move to Grafton. Wampanoag people never moved to Grafton because we knew that was Nipmuc country. So you had other Wampanoag communities that would disperse around. Also, shortly after, I mentioned about that smallpox vaccine that was produced here for the native people in 1763 that totally decimated the population on the island here. This right here is 1830 Removal Act, right? I bring this up because these people came here. This was produced by President Jackson. It removed indigenous people from their lands on the East Coast. And these agents came all around Massachusetts, and they came to the communities, and they were ready to remove us too. But there was one native voice, a non-native voice that spoke up, his name being John Quincy Adams. He said, if you remove the native people from their homeland, they're gonna die. And the reason they're gonna die is they rely on seafood on their diet. And so if you go inland, there's no ocean. So and they believed them. So they left us alone. And that's why I can still be here today talking to you guys. This is where I'm from, of course, Mashpee. Incorporated 1870. What incorporation means to me is taken. It's considered to be a town in 1870. We were given back 25 of our acres of our own land, but now it's considered to be a township. Guess what? Now you're going to be taxed on your land. And we lost a lot of land because we're not a wealthy people. We still live there. I think we only have land in trust, maybe close to 400 acres. That's not a big area. This is my wife, once again. She is a teacher of language, guys, of our language. This is a good story. I'm going to tell you it real quick. We came that far from losing our language. Back in the early 1900s, if you weren't speaking English, you weren't speaking the right language. So a lot of people were made fun of no matter who you were, what language you spoke. Ridiculed. So what the parents told the kids, don't bother speaking your native tongue because I don't want you going through the same thing I went through. And it wasn't spoken for a long time. Then there's a woman from my community, her name being Jessie Little No Beard, was having dreams. She said people came into her dreams speaking a different tongue, and it wasn't English. She goes, these faces look familiar, but I don't recognize the names. And one of the dreams, they came and spoke English to her. They said the Wampanoag people had the opportunity to get their language back. Would they say yes? So she went around the communities and said, would you want to see Wampanoag spoken again? And of course everybody said yes. She took it upon herself, went to MIT, graduated with a degree in linguistics, and started piecing the language back together again. How this was done. You have similar language families, right? One. You had elders who could still speak some of the language. Two. And it's kind of ironic how things come full circle. You heard me mention John Eliot a little bit. He took the King James Bible, he learned a lot of Wampanoag. He brought on Wampanoag interpreters and wrote the King James Bible on Wampanoag. And that helped bring our language back once again. Helped bring our language back. And we have one of those first editions in our language project today. So my wife's been teaching for about 20 years herself. And this is our government center, guys, in Mashpee. One thing I'm going to mention, I didn't mention about, you hear about the last native on Nantucket, Dorcas Honorable, back in the mid-1800s. That's the last recorded one we know of, right? I say we know of because I guarantee you there's other native people still living here. They just didn't have to be recorded. I've talked to a lot of indigenous and non-indigenous scholars. They totally agree. They might have went elsewhere on the island. They didn't have to be recorded. So, yeah, we're island bouncers, guys. I say I'm Mashpee Wampanoag, but I'm also a Quitter and Choppaquiddick too, which I don't mention. I didn't mention today, at least not until now. We always were very communal people, sociable people, so we get around. This is our powwow. We have July 4th weekend in Mashpee. It's over 100 years old now. If you guys want to get off island, please do. Come see us. Visit one of the days. Goes on for 3 days. Oh, oops, sorry about that. So I'm going to leave you off there, guys. So I gave you guys a lot of information in that span. So I'd like to open up some questions you guys might have for some time. Please do. Yeah.
Thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. It's really remarkable. Could you estimate how many Wampanoags still live on Nantucket?
I don't know of any. I'm sure there's descendants, but there's no descendants. I don't know of any that I know of myself. I know the question was how many descendants of Wampanoags are living on Nantucket today. I know like I said, my father grew up here. He moved out. My aunt was here. My grandparents were here. Today, I come over and visit quite a bit. But I'm sure there are some descendants, but I just don't know which ones they are. That's a good question. Good question. Yes?
Can DNA testing help you trace where the Wampanoags are today?
You know, that's a good question. Does DNA testing, will DNA testing test where Wampanoag people are today? I don't think it will, because when you do like me in 23, the testing is more general. Like a friend of mine did that. Oh, he's from the Midwest, and they don't tell what tribe exactly where they're from, what tribe they are. They'll tell you the local area, and it's possible, but they won't clarify. Okay, this is a community, this is the Wampanoag, but they'll give you a general area. But I haven't seen our people do that around here, but it can be done. I come from Mashpee myself, which our community, we go through from our 1859 census, which we track down generation from generation, so.
Do the Wampanoag have any special hunting and foraging rights?
Do the Wampanoag have hunting, fishing, foraging rights? Yes. That's our sovereign right to do that. That's our cultural right to do that. And that's a really good question, because it's being challenged quite a bit today. I'm a shell fisherman. My wife comes with me shell fishing. Sometimes she goes her own. Same thing with hunting. And there's certain towns which will understand the sovereign rights, and some towns that doesn't matter. And no matter how you look at it, if you go to court, the town will lose, because it's a federal, it's beyond the town, you know. I'll give you an example of what happened to my uncle. He was in the town of Sandwich, right, which is next to Mashpee. He was going hunting. He had his gun, his permits and all that. We can hunt anytime we want. We can fish anytime we want, but we know our traditional cycle, when to do that and when not to do it. So he was going into the woods. And the police stopped, said, "Hey, come here, what are you doing?" So Uncle Milt looked at him and said, "I'm going to get dinner, what are you doing?" And he was serious. "No, you can't do that, come on, I gotta arrest you, which he did, he got arrested. They threw cement in his gun, and he had to go to court, right? Now this is a really interesting part right here. So he goes to court in Barnstable, and my Uncle Milt always wears a leather headband wherever he goes, that's who he is. And the DA's like, "Well, you have to take that off because you're in the court right now." And my Uncle Milt said, "Okay, I'll take this off once that guy up there takes that black robe off." You think about that, that's some heavy words right there. And the judge knew that. The judge looked at him and said, "You're absolutely right, leave him alone." But this last year, my wife and I were in another town off Cape Wareham, and we got challenged by one shell fishing. But thing about today, everybody has these today, right?
Yeah.
So those come out really quick.
This one. My understanding is that the tribe is older than the islands. Are there stories about how they first came to the islands? Did they really walk? Or
Yeah, going back thousands of years ago, yeah, it was all. Was the islands? The question was the islands? Did we always here? Did we walk here? Yeah, because the islands were a part of the mainland at one time. All the islands, all the Elizabeth Islands, they broke off eventually when the floods started happening and such, and warming started happening. So yeah, they walked it, but obviously and you had the stories of Marshall, how the Aquinas story, how the giant made these islands too, by using his feet. But yeah, either way, Nantucket, we're all part as one. That's what my theme is today, because Nantucket, Mashpee, Wampanoag, it's all who we are. So yeah. Yes.
We live in North Wayman in Massachusetts, and I grew up around streets that had all the Squanto necessary at the Wampanoag, a lot of things like that, and I just wondered if that fits in with your story.
Yeah, the question was, your name is, ma'am? Your name? Your name?
My
Linda grew up in Weymouth, which is on Massachusetts, town of Massachusetts, Wampanoag country, on the border of other communities, Massachusetts and such. And she mentioned names about town, street names, Metacomet, Wittawamut. And yeah, that all ties into history. These are all indigenous people around the area, Metacomet being Massasoit's second son. Any idea who Wittawamut was? Oh. Wittawamut was a Massachusetts, being a community or nation of people up toward Boston, right? He was a war leader. And he was plotting against the English in 1622, right after they came. Now, how you really felt toward the colonists being here when they first got here, it would vary a lot on who you asked, on where you went, and how you were treated. If your brother got taken as a slave, you're not going to be open arms to another people coming in, no matter who they are. It was a very confusing time at that time, too. Massasoit did not have everybody's blessing when the colonists got here. We know Combatown was one, a leader. We know Wittawamut was another. And when Plymouth Colony found out about Wittawamut, his plots, and how he found out was from Massasoit. Massasoit told the English. They went up there and they took out himself, Wittawamut, and Pexawit, two leaders, Massachusetts war leaders, and took Wittawamut's head. Mind you, this is not even 3 years after they landed, and took Wittawamut's head and put it on a plantation post in Plymouth for 20 years. Me working up there for so long, right, up in Plymouth, I go, if we really want to be accurate, we would have that head on a post, because they portray 1627, right? But I can understand why it was never done, because we have kids coming in and all that. You want to see a bloody head up there. But there's other ways we could have done it, but we want to always tell the true history. That's one thing I've always been trained to do and train other people to do, interpreters, is don't be shy from history. Don't be shy explaining it and telling it. It's how you say it, how you word it. And where I used to work, right, we encountered people from all around the world. But not everybody can interpret that history, because for us as indigenous Wampanoag people, it can be tough, because it's real. Slavery happened, cultural genocide happened, colonization happened, and it still affects us today. And I used to tell people, they'll come up to me, my tribal members, my community, my relatives, say, can I work where you work? I'm like, okay, I know you're good at making baskets, but can you talk about these subjects without getting upset at the guest? They look at me like, I don't know if I can do that, Darius. I go, that's what we do. And it's important for us to know that too. For anybody, you want to tell the true story no matter what it is. People are tired over the years of being lied to. But it's all how we tell that story, so, which is very important. And how we word it. Like I can be upset, oh, it was your relatives who killed my people, da-da-da. You're not going to get anywhere like that, I don't believe, because you're going to shut off a learning moment. So by explaining yourself, this is what happened, about slavery, colonization, whatever, you can also talk about corned beans and squash and Wampanoag football, all in one breath. But you're never going to see the tones go up and down. And that's how people will listen, that's how they'll stay. And so I've always said during my talks and what I do, we have a power to change a person's way of thought, which is cool. How you guys come in today and how you leave might be different. Hopefully more educational, more profitable for yourself. So, yes?
Do you have any thoughts on the past weekend, which changing the name to Indigenous Peoples versus Columbus Day?
Do I have any thoughts about Columbus Day going over to Indigenous People Weekend Day? For me, it's a no-brainer. It really is. We've been here, we're the original people of the land, and we've been here for thousands of years, and we'll continue to be here for thousands of years. Columbus, he didn't do a lot of positive things and we know for a fact, for indigenous cultures, you know, and this is proven, this is recorded from his own priest, who was on those 3 ships that came over with him. So there was a lot of great things he did. So yeah, I'm glad a lot of towns look at it, and a lot of towns are changing the way I thought about it. And it gives us more, the spotlight has never been our big deal. We know who we are. We know we've what we do. But it gives other cultures, okay, wow, indigenous people are more recognizable. These people, oh yeah. So you see towns now doing land acknowledgements about the people around where they live before they speak and such. So.
Thank you. Doris, we have one more.
Thank you for your presentation. In many dimensions, and I'll leave somewhat changed by your attitude and especially your comments in the last 5 minutes or so. Are there burial grounds scattered around? Are there any on Nantucket, and are they respected?
I can say both, because last time I was here, there's, well, I know from people who's worked here before, we have burials here. I got family who's buried here up in Prospect Cemetery. I just visited them yesterday, my dad, my aunt, my grandparents, my great uncles. But there's the indigenous burials that have been there for thousands of years, they don't have to be marked, right? People, and sometimes they're disturbed. There's construction going on and such. And a lot of time when there's construction going on, you might lose profit, financial gain if you stop doing construction. So yeah, I've heard of those stories too, which is unfortunate. So it's both ways. So. And the question was burials, are they respected on Nantucket Island? So, yes.
Curious if the native populations mark their ancestral graves.
Yeah, we mark and we have stones. Like where I live in Mashpee, we have burials that go back to the 1600s. But we've marked them going past that with stones like this. They don't have to put the names on them and all that, but yeah, you have stone areas where people are buried. And for us as indigenous people, there's a certain way we bury our dead. We bury our dead in the ground. We bury our dead in a fetal position facing the southwest, because that's where we believe our creator's from. So that's the way we came in, so that's the way we're gonna go out. And that's still done today. So where I'm from, we have the oldest Indian meeting house in the United States. It was built in 1664. And that's where we have a lot of our relatives, my ancestors are buried right there.
We're gonna wrap up and we're gonna show you a film.
Oh.
Yep. And we'll have some
Yeah, I'm gonna leave with a film, guys. As you guys walked in, you saw the Machoon out there, Machoon meaning boat in my language, which I produced for NHA this past spring, and I brought it over here a couple days ago. So, and hopefully we'll have some major planning going on next year to more publicizing for you guys and maybe
How did you bring it over here?
Oh, good question. Did I paddle it over? I paddled one to Martha's Vineyard before, but I never paddled one here yet. No, I didn't paddle here. I didn't even take the fast ferry here with it. I took the slow ferry. So, but it's a 2-man boat. Yeah, you'll see me explaining about it. This is who we are as a people, People should be proud of who they are, period, no matter what they are. One of my responsibilities in life is keeping this type of things going on. Don't stop it. And me being as a Wampanoag person, being in one of these boats, paddling that, I remember my ancestors. I can just have that feeling come to me, how they would paddle, how they would fish out in the water, how they would travel. So it's a big honor for me. My father was born over in Nantucket. My aunt was born over in Nantucket. My grandparents moved over to Nantucket. I got 4 daughters, but one of my daughters, her name is Tashima, and she was a daughter of a chief from Nantucket. The name comes from, right? And what Tashima means is one who lifts up. Only a few boats like this have been in that water for probably close to 1,000 years. And that's pretty cool. Nantucket, Cutty-Hunk, Martha's Vineyard, known as Capawack Nope by our people. If you need to get from one place to another, on water, obviously you use your boat, right? What we call a mashoon. You burn, scrape, and this is how you make your bowls, your spoons, your mortars for grinding corn. If you had a piece of wood and you needed to haul it out, you burn and scrape it. You wouldn't carve, chop a whole lot. Now, a common question we get a lot is, for us as Native people, is how long does it take? I've done boats like this anywhere around a week, right? And that's for a 12-foot white pine boat. And that's burning all day, all night. And as you're burning all day, all night, the fire itself will get hotter and hotter, and it's gonna burn quicker and quicker. How many mashoon ashes I've made in my career, in my lifetime? I'll say over 50. For making a mashoon like you see here, you have to choose the right tree. For one, the tree has to be near a body of water, being a river or a pond. And also you're looking for a tree that goes straight up for a while before branching off. Then what you do, you have clay. You get clay from the riverbeds and you pack it around the trunk. You build a fire underneath it, and that way the fire will not extend up. And as the tree is falling down, you burn off the other end. The log itself is made out of white pine, so it's a soft wood. But for burning on the inside, the wood you want to use are hardwood. You want to use oaks, you want to use maple, you want to use cherry. Because the hardwood itself will produce very minimum flame, but plenty of heat. Coals are what actually does the work. It burns hotter. It's a control burn. This is how you get around. You either use your mashoon, your boat, or you will walk or run. No horses in North America. We also use it for fishing, which is very important. Go for freshwater, go for saltwater fish. And there's some recording of us going for whales thousands of years ago in these boats. You want to go when the tide is coming in. You'd have boats lined up sort of like a funnel. Then the men would be paddling that small whale and scaring that small whale into shore with the tide. I've sailed these boats a few times. We don't really know exactly sure what the sails look like, but we have numerous recordings of these boats being sailed out to Nantucket Island. It makes sense, it gets really windy out in the ocean, so why not take advantage of the wind and go with it? Right now, this is a very beginning stage of boat building, and what you'll eventually see toward the end, one of the final stages is we're going to get the sides to be about an inch thick, really thin. So literally once you get to the end, you can turn your head for about 5 or 10 minutes and turn back around, and you can burn off the side. Once you get to the final days, you'll see how critical it is to control that fire. The second phase is like the mid phase. You really got to pay attention. You got to challenge yourself, and that's what it is right there. How thin can you get it? Yeah, I can keep tinkering for a long time, you know. But you don't want to tinker with it too much, you know, especially when you're playing with fire. You get the sides are really thin. Some of the sides could be less than a ½ inch thick. Every step, every minute is very critical. You don't want it to burn, you put water on it. You always douse it with water. And this final phase is kind of like the finish work. A lot of scraping. You want to scrape out all the charcoal. That actually has a purpose also, what we do with the charcoal. We would use it for a lot of face paint, body paint. When we painted up ourselves, it would normally be the whole body. A lot of times that meant in the morning, maybe somebody in your family had passed away. The sides are really thin, like even paper thin up top. And as you go down to the bottom, you get thicker. So the bottom, you always want to be very thick. That's for stability, so you have your natural balance in the water. it rode really well in the water. You can fit 2 men in with their fishing gear inside a boat like this, how it rides. And maybe we'll have some other people go in it once we get to Nantucket. We'll see how that goes. Having this go over to Nantucket, it reminds people of our culture, that we haven't gone anywhere. Some things have been interrupted, but we've carried a lot of tradition along over the years and still have a lot of tradition today. There's so many misunderstandings about our culture out there, mislearnings, as they say. So to straighten up the stereotypes, the accuracy of the history, it's very important. So for me, it's not just making of a boat, but having that physical presence anywhere as an exhibit. It's pretty powerful.